She was not born into that house. Everyone knew it, even though no one ever said it out loud. From the day her mother married again, she understood that she was a guest in someone else's life, someone else's family, and someone else's space. Her name was Alla. She was quiet by nature, not because she lacked confidence, but because she learned early that speaking too much could make things worse. The house she moved into was large, older than her memories, and filled with heavy furniture that smelled of polish and time. It was the kind of house that carried history in its walls. But none of that history included her. Her stepfather owned the house. He had built his life slowly, with patience and discipline. He was not a loud man, not one who spoke about feelings or dreams. He believed in work, routine, and responsibility. When Ayla first met him, she noticed his eyes. They were calm but observant, like he was always paying attention, even when he said nothing. The marriage between him and Ayla's mother was polite, not romantic. There were two people who had been lonely for a long time and decided that being alone was harder than sharing space. Ayla accepted this. She was already used to adjusting. Her stepbrothers lived in the house long before she arrived. They were older than her and moved through the rooms like they owned them. They spoke loudly, laughed without care, and made plans that always involved money or control. To them, the house was not a home. It was a future reward. From the first week, Alla felt the difference in how they saw her. They were not openly cruel, but they were never kind. They ignored her presence unless they needed something. If she sat in the living room, they turned the television louder. If she cooked, they complained about the smell. Small things, but they added up. Her mother noticed, but she was tired. Life had worn her down, and she chose peace over conflict. She often told Ayla to be patient, to understand that it takes time to become a family. Alla nodded, even when she knew that time would not change anything. The stepfather watched quietly. He did not interfere much, but he noticed how Alla moved through the house without taking space, how she cleaned after herself and others, how she never asked for anything extra. She did not complain when her room was the smallest or when her opinions were ignored at the dinner table. Alla worked part-time while studying. She paid for her own needs when she could. She believed that relying on others gave them power over her, and she did not want to owe anyone anything. Every evening, she returned home tired but calm. The house was not warm, but it was shelter. The stepbrothers lived differently. They spoke of plans but rarely followed through. They asked their father for money often and complained when he refused. They believed the future was guaranteed. After all, they were his sons. At dinner, conversations often turned into one-sided talks about business, property, or how things would be divided one day. Alla stayed silent during these talks. They did not include her, and she did not want to be noticed. Her stepfather listened, but rarely agreed. Sometimes he asked simple questions, like what they had done that day or how they planned to improve things. The answers were often unclear. He did not argue. He simply nodded and continued eating. Alla began to spend more time with him without planning to. It started with small moments. She brought him tea when he forgot. She helped organize papers when he struggled to find something. She listened when he spoke about old memories, even when they did not interest her much. She listened because no one else did. He never thanked her with words. Instead, he trusted her with small tasks. He asked her to help sort files, manage phone calls, or accompany him to appointments. Ayla did not question why. She simply helped. As months passed, his health slowly changed. It was not sudden, but it was noticeable. He moved slower. He forgot things. His voice became weaker. The stepbrothers noticed only when it affected them, when he refused to give money or reminded them of responsibility. Alla noticed everything. She adjusted her schedule to be home more often. She learned his routines, his habits, and the small signs that showed when he was tired. She cooked simple meals that were easy to eat. She made sure he took his medication. She did not see it as a duty. It felt natural, like helping someone who needed help. Her mother appreciated it, but rarely said so. The stepbrothers ignored it completely. To them, Alla was still an outsider, still temporary, sometimes late at night. Ala sat alone in her room and wondered what her place really was. She did not dream of inheritance or reward. She dreamed of peace. A life where she did not feel like she had to shrink to survive. She never imagined that anything in that house would ever belong to her. The stepfather continued to observe. He noticed how Ala never spoke badly about anyone. Even when she had reason to, she stayed respectful. He noticed how she never asked him for money, never hinted at expectations, and never complained about her position in the family. To him, this meant something. The house remained the same on the outside. Meals were eaten. Conversations happened. Life continued. But beneath the surface, something quiet was forming. Not a plan, not a decision, but an understanding. Ayla did not know it yet, but the way she lived, the way she showed up without demand, was slowly shaping a future no one expected. And while the stepbrothers spoke loudly about what they believed was theirs, the one person they ignored was leaving the deepest impression of all. The story was only beginning. Even though no one in that house realized it at the time, the change did not happen all at once. It came quietly, the way dust gathers in corners when no one is watching. At first, Ayla thought she was imagining things. The looks lasted a little longer. The voices dropped when she entered a room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. After the funeral, the house felt different. The silence was heavier, almost uncomfortable. Her stepfather's presence was gone, but his routine still shaped the days. His chair at the table stayed empty. His room remained closed, as if opening it would make the loss real. The stepbrothers stayed in the house. But they no longer spoke to Ayla unless necessary. When they did, their tone was sharp, impatient. They walked around like they were waiting for something, counting days instead of hours. Ala focused on her work and studies. Grief made her tired, but she did not allow herself to slow down. She had learned that staying busy kept her safe. When her mind was occupied, she didn't have to think about how fragile her position felt. One morning, a letter arrived addressed to all of them. It came from a legal office. Ayla's hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the table. She did not open it. She waited. The stepbrothers tore into it the moment they saw the envelope. Their faces were confident, almost excited. They joked loudly, already talking about selling assets and making changes to the house. Ala stayed quiet, sitting at the edge of the table. Her mother watched nervously, her fingers twisted together. The letter explained that the will would be read officially the following week. Until then, nothing could be touched or moved. The mood shifted immediately. The jokes stopped. The smiles faded. That week felt endless. At night, Ala lay awake thinking about her future. She had no expectations. She assumed she would be asked to leave eventually. She began looking at rental listings, calculating what she could afford. It was better to be prepared than surprised. The day of the reading arrived sooner than she expected. They sat in a small office with neutral walls and uncomfortable chairs. The lawyer spoke calmly, professionally, as if this was just another file among hundreds. Ayla listened without emotion until she heard her own name. At first, she thought she misunderstood. The words sounded unreal, like they belonged to someone else's story. The main property? Financial accounts. Responsibility for certain business matters. The room reacted before she did. One stepbrother stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The other laughed, short and sharp, like it was a joke taken too far. Her mother covered her mouth in shock. Ala remained still. The lawyer continued, explaining that the decision had been made years earlier and updated carefully. He spoke about responsibility, trust, and long-term thinking. He did not raise his voice, but every word felt heavy when it was over. No one spoke. The ride home was silent. That night, the house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a place she was being tolerated in. The stepbrothers avoided her, but their anger filled the air. Doors closed harder. Footsteps became louder. The next morning, the first comment came. It was small, almost casual. A question about fairness, about family, about how things should be shared. Ala listened, nodded, and said nothing. She was still trying to understand what had happened, but the comments didn't stop. They reminded her that she was not blood. They hinted that she owed them something. They spoke about pressure from relatives, about expectations. Every sentence was wrapped in guilt. Alla felt the weight of it. She had never wanted this position. She had never asked for it. But she also knew one thing clearly: giving in would not bring peace. It would only invite more demands. She spoke to the lawyer privately. She asked questions. She listened carefully. She learned that everything had been done legally and intentionally. There was no mistake. This knowledge gave her quiet strength. At home, things escalated. Her belongings were moved without permission. Important papers went missing. Comments became accusations. One evening, voices were raised for the first time. Her mother cried and begged everyone to calm down. Alice stood silently, her hands shaking, her heart racing. She felt like a child again, powerless and exposed. That night, she locked her door for the first time since moving into the house. She started keeping records. She saved messages. She noted dates and conversations, not because she wanted conflict, but because she knew she needed protection. The Stepbrothers talked openly about challenging the will. They said it confidently, as if saying it enough times would make it true. Alla did not respond. She focused on staying steady. She went to work. She studied. She took deep breaths when the tension became too much. Inside, fear and resolve existed together. She remembered the man who had trusted her. She remembered his quiet observations, his unspoken approval. She knew that whatever his reasons were, they mattered. The house was no longer calm, but Ayla was. She did not celebrate. She did not boast. She simply stood her ground, and while the Stepbrothers believed pressure would break her, they underestimated the strength that grows in someone who has survived being invisible. The conflict had only just begun. The house that once felt quiet and orderly had changed completely. Every room seemed tense, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next argument. Alla noticed it immediately. The small things had become bigger. The Stepbrothers no longer spoke in casual tones. Their words carried sharp edges. Doors slammed. Footsteps were hurried and heavy. Even the air felt heavier. Alla tried to continue her routine. She went to work, studied in her small corner of the house, and prepared meals quietly. She avoided confrontation whenever she could, but the Stepbrothers found ways to make their presence felt. One morning, she discovered that her laundry had been thrown on the floor. Another time, she came back from work to find her room door left wide open, as if someone wanted her to feel exposed at first. She thought about leaving, even for a short while to escape the tension. But deep down, she knew that running would not solve anything. The house, the inheritance, and the responsibilities had been entrusted to her, and she would not abandon what she had been given. No matter how unfair the situation felt, her stepbrothers began to speak openly about their intentions. One of them suggested selling some of the inherited property immediately, without even consulting her. The other questioned her ability to manage the accounts, her knowledge of finances, and even her memory of household details. Every word was a challenge, meant to unsettle her, to make her doubt herself. Alla remained calm. She listened carefully, asked questions, and made notes. She had learned that reacting emotionally would only give them power. She reminded herself that she was not alone in this. The lawyer had advised her that everything in the will was legally binding, and the stepfather's decisions were final. That knowledge became her shield. Despite her calm, the stepbrothers' tactics grew more aggressive. They tried to influence her mother, speaking in hushed voices behind closed doors. They criticized Ayla's choices, her work, and even her manners. They suggested that she was ungrateful, that she was taking more than her share, and that the family would be ruined if she did not cooperate. Ayla's mother, though saddened by the conflict, tried to remain neutral. She had always been a woman of patience and understanding, but even she could not hide her worry. She reminded Ayla to be careful and to protect herself, but she could not intervene without angering the stepbrothers. The house felt like a battlefield, and Ayla realized she had to navigate it alone. One evening, the stepbrothers crossed a line. They entered her room without permission while she was out, searching through her belongings. Important papers were moved, personal items misplaced. When she returned and discovered it, she felt a surge of anger, mixed with fear. She knew that this behavior was not just cruelty. It was an attempt to intimidate her. Ayla did not retaliate immediately. Instead, she took photographs, documented the events, and stored them safely. She contacted the lawyer to discuss the situation and understand her rights more clearly. She learned that evidence of interference could help protect her in future disputes. Every act of aggression by her stepbrothers became a reason to be vigilant, not fearful. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house remained high. Meals were quiet, with only polite words exchanged. The stepbrothers no longer attempted casual conversations. They only spoke when necessary, and always with a tone of superiority. They seemed frustrated that Ayla did not respond in the way they expected. They expected fear, hesitation, or submission. Instead, they encountered composure and quiet determination. Ayla began to notice small changes in herself. She became more observant, noticing patterns in her stepbrother's behavior. She learned to anticipate their moves, to avoid traps, and to maintain her own space and peace of mind. She discovered a strength she had not known before, a combination of patience, courage, and courage. Her stepfather's absence was felt more than ever. She remembered his quiet approval, the small ways he had trusted her, and the encouragement that had been unspoken but constant. His lessons were embedded in her actions now, guiding her in ways that words never could. One afternoon, the stepbrothers approached her with a new challenge. They insisted she agree to a temporary arrangement, suggesting that certain parts of the inheritance be placed under their control for better management. They framed it as concern. But Ayla saw it for what it was, an attempt to regain control. She listened calmly and replied with facts. She explained the legal framework, the responsibilities entrusted to her, and the consequences of violating the will. She did not raise her voice. She did not insult them. She simply stated the truth. The stepbrothers reacted with disbelief and anger. They could not understand why she remained composed. They expected fear, manipulation, or emotional response. Instead, they were met with confidence and clarity. The realization began to dawn on them. Ayla was not someone they could easily intimidate or control. As the days went on, Ayla found small moments of solace. She took walks outside the house, enjoying the quiet of nature and the sense of freedom it brought. She visited local markets, exchanged greetings with neighbors, and immersed herself in small acts of normal life. These moments became essential, helping her maintain balance and perspective. The stepbrothers, frustrated by her calm, tried different tactics. They spread rumors among relatives, questioned her character, even attempted to involve distant family members in disputes. Every act was meant to isolate her, to create doubt, and to weaken her resolve. But Ayla had learned that strength is not about confrontation alone. It is about understanding, preparation, and patience. She began to see the situation as a test of character, not just a battle for property. She understood that the house, the inheritance, and even the stepbrothers' actions were secondary to the person she was becoming. Each challenge strengthened her resilience, sharpened her judgment, and deepened her understanding of human behavior. One evening, she found herself alone in the living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. She realized that the inheritance was not just about money or property. It was a responsibility, a reflection of trust, and a measure of integrity. Her stepbrothers had turned cruel, but their actions only highlighted her own steadfastness. The weeks passed with continued tension. Ayla remained vigilant. She continued documenting, planning, and maintaining her daily life. She learned that calm observation often had more power than loud confrontation. She discovered that patience and careful action could protect her more effectively than fear or aggression. Despite the hostility, Ayla also noticed moments of vulnerability in her stepbrothers. Their anger was rooted in disappointment, frustration, and a sense of lost entitlement. She did not rejoice in their frustration. Instead, she understood it as part of the larger story unfolding, a story in which choices, character, and responsibility mattered more than inheritance alone. Through every challenge, Ala maintained her humanity. She remained polite, respectful, and composed. She did not insult, threaten, or demean anyone. Her actions spoke louder than words, showing strength without cruelty. By the end of the month, a subtle shift had occurred. The stepbrothers had become more cautious, realizing that intimidation would not work. Their plans were stalled, and their influence over the household diminished. Ayla's calm, steadfast approach had created a new balance. She understood that the journey was far from over. Conflict was still present, and challenges would continue. But she had discovered a truth more important than any inheritance: her strength. Integrity and determination were hers alone, unshakable and untouchable by cruelty. And as she stood in her room, looking out at the quiet evening sky, Ayla felt a quiet sense of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but she knew that she could face it with courage, patience, and unwavering resolve. The house, once a place of tension and fear, had become a classroom of life's harshest lessons, teaching her that true strength is built in the quiet moments, in steadfastness. And in the refusal to give in to cruelty, the tension in the house had not disappeared, but something had shifted. Ayla noticed it slowly. In the way her stepbrothers spoke less boldly, and in the way their steps faltered when they thought she was not watching. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. They were no longer as confident, no longer as sure that they could intimidate her. The quiet strength she had built, the careful way she moved through the household, had begun to matter. One afternoon, she received a call from the lawyer. He wanted to meet and discuss some handwritten notes left behind by her stepfather. Ala felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She had never expected to see such personal words, but she understood that they might hold the answers she needed. The lawyer explained that the notes were detailed, explaining why the stepfather had chosen to leave the majority of the inheritance to her. They spoke of character, of responsibility, of integrity. The words described how her stepbrothers had acted with entitlement and impatience, and how Ayla had quietly proven herself worthy of trust. The lawyer advised her to keep the notes safe. They were personal, powerful, and indisputable evidence if needed. Ala returned home that evening carrying the notes carefully. She did not share their contents with anyone. Instead, she read them in private, letting each word sink in. Her stepfather had recognized her strength long before the will was read. He had seen what she had done for him, the care she had given without expectation, and the patience she had shown in a house that was often unkind. It was not about inheritance for him, it was about trust. The next few days brought small confrontations. Her stepbrothers tried to push her into decisions, to create situations where she might falter. They questioned her choices in property management and in household decisions. But Ayla was calm. She spoke with facts, with patience, and with clarity. She relied on the guidance her stepfather had given, even indirectly, and on the legal framework that was her shield at one point. One of the stepbrothers attempted to manipulate her mother into agreeing with his plans. He suggested that Ala was unfit to handle responsibilities, that she was inexperienced, and that family unity required her cooperation. Her mother, though concerned, refused to interfere directly. She had learned that Ayla had grown stronger, and that support could come silently, not through confrontation. Ayla, for her part, began documenting everything with even more care. Notes, photographs, and correspondence were organized and kept safely. She did not want to escalate conflict unnecessarily, but she understood that preparedness was a form of protection. Every time her stepbrothers acted out, she collected evidence quietly, without drama. Despite the hostility, Ala found moments of connection with the house itself. She began restoring small areas, arranging furniture, and cleaning spaces that had been neglected. It was not about showing ownership. It was about respect for the life that had been built before her arrival. These acts, though simple, gave her a sense of peace. The house began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a home she was gradually shaping. One morning, she overheard a conversation between her stepbrothers. They were arguing quietly, their voices low but tense. One accused the other of not handling a minor task correctly, and the other argued back. Alla realized that their anger at her had also created conflict between them. Their focus on intimidation and control had left them unprepared for accountability. She did not intervene, but she noted the shift. Conflict, she understood, often reveals hidden truths. Her confidence grew, not through victory over them, but through understanding herself and the situation. She realized that inheritance, wealth, and property were secondary to character and action. Her stepfather had entrusted her not because of opportunity, but because she had proven herself in ways that mattered more than money. This knowledge was empowering. The weeks passed, and with them came subtle acknowledgement from others in the family. Distant relatives who had been curious about the will began to approach her with respect. They asked questions politely, acknowledged her responsibilities, and in some cases, offered support. The Stepbrothers noticed this, and their frustration deepened. They realized that influence and intimidation were not enough to sway those who understood the truth. Alla also began to see moments of vulnerability in her stepbrothers. Their cruelty, their anger, and their impatience were not signs of strength. They were signs of insecurity and disappointment. Understanding this, she did not feel joy in their discomfort. She felt compassion, tempered by the need to protect herself and her responsibilities. Her daily life became a careful balance of maintaining household responsibilities, managing her inheritance, and navigating the stepbrothers' moods. She learned to anticipate their moves, to respond calmly, and to maintain her dignity at all times. The house, once filled with fear and tension, began to feel more like a stage 4 measured action rather than a place of constant threat. One evening, Alla decided to take a walk outside the house. The sky was clear and the air was crisp. As she walked through the quiet streets, she reflected on the journey so far. She had faced hostility, manipulation, and intimidation. She had learned patience, observation, and the quiet power of integrity. She understood that true strength was built not in confrontation alone, but in steadfastness, preparation, and moral clarity. Returning home, she found a small note slipped under her door. It was from the lawyer, reminding her that her stepfather's notes were important evidence and that she should keep them secure. She smiled slightly, realizing that even in small ways, support was present, guiding her toward the right actions. That night, she wrote in her journal. She recorded events, thoughts, and reflections, not as a record for anyone else, but as a way to understand her own journey. Writing became a form of clarity, helping her process the tension in the house and her growing awareness of responsibility and character as the weeks turned into months. Ayla's approach continued to shape the household. Her calm composure, careful documentation, and quiet strength left the stepbrothers frustrated. They tried to find new ways to challenge her, but she anticipated them. Their attempts became less frequent, their voices less bold. Alla began to see the inheritance not as a prize or reward, but as a responsibility and a reflection of trust. Her stepfather had chosen her not because she demanded it, but because she had proven herself through action, integrity, and patience. This understanding became a source of confidence that no hostility could shake, even as the stepbrothers' anger lingered. Alla found small moments of peace. She spent time in the garden, reading and reflecting. She cooked meals carefully, tending not only to herself but to anyone who shared the table. She connected with neighbors and friends, building a life that was outside the reach of household conflict. The house, once dominated by tension and fear, was gradually becoming a place where quiet strength and careful action mattered more than aggression. Alla realized that she had learned one of life's most important lessons: integrity, patience, and calm resolve are more powerful than cruelty or entitlement. By the end of this chapter of her life, Ayla understood the truth. The inheritance had not chosen her by chance. It had chosen her because she had shown strength, care, and wisdom in ways that could not be measured by money alone. The stepbrothers' cruelty had highlighted her resilience, and the house that had once been a place of fear had become a testament to character, responsibility, and the quiet power of steadfastness. The weeks after the shift in the household felt calmer. But Ayla knew the real test had not yet come. The stepbrothers' frustration lingered like a shadow, and she had learned that patience alone would not solve everything. She had to remain alert, careful, and consistent in her actions. She continued to follow the routines she had established. She worked on managing the accounts, reviewing properties, and maintaining order in the house. She approached every task with careful attention, knowing that mistakes could be twisted or used against her. Her confidence grew with every successful decision, and her calm demeanor became a subtle force that even the stepbrothers could not ignore. One morning, Ella received a visitor she had not expected. It was a distant relative who had heard about the will and wanted to discuss matters. Ella welcomed the visitor politely, listened carefully, and answered questions with honesty. The conversation was respectful, but it was also an opportunity for Ella to show that she was not only capable, but fair and reasonable. By the time the visitor left, Ella felt a quiet sense of pride. She was handling the responsibilities with integrity. The stepbrothers noticed these interactions and became increasingly uneasy. They realized that their attempts to undermine her had little effect. Her careful balance of patience, observation, and action had created a situation in which intimidation no longer worked. The house, once a place of open hostility, was becoming a space where careful choices and steadfastness carried more weight than aggression. One evening, Isla found herself alone in the living room. She reflected on everything that had happened, the hostility, the quiet moments of trust with her stepfather, and the gradual shift in the household dynamic. She understood that the inheritance was not just property or money. It was a responsibility, a test of character, and a reflection of the values her stepfather had tried to teach her. She remembered the handwritten notes, the words that explained why she had been chosen. They were not just legal documents. They were a personal testament, showing that trust, care, and integrity mattered more than entitlement or aggression. Ayla felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the inheritance itself, but for the lessons and the trust that had been placed in her. As days passed, small changes became more noticeable. The stepbrothers, while still resentful, began to behave with more restraint. They spoke less harshly, avoided direct confrontation, and sometimes even paused before acting. Alla realized that her steady approach had earned a form of respect, even if unspoken. The household, though still tense at times, was no longer a battlefield where every moment carried the threat of conflict. Alla also began to focus on her personal life. She maintained her work, her studies, and her small routines outside the house. She found peace in walks, in quiet moments of reflection, and in connections with friends and neighbors. These moments reminded her that life extended beyond the walls of the household and that her strength was not just for conflict but for living fully and authentically. One afternoon, the stepbrothers confronted her directly. They spoke about selling a property and dividing the proceeds in a way they felt was fair. Ayla listened carefully, asked questions, and explained the legal implications and responsibilities involved. She remained calm and clear, refusing to be manipulated or pressured. The conversation ended without anger. A rare moment of temporary truce. Alla understood that the stepbrothers' behavior would continue to fluctuate. But she also knew that she had built a foundation that could not easily be shaken. She relied on careful documentation, legal guidance, and her own steady presence. Every decision was thoughtful, every action deliberate, and every response measured. She had learned that strength was quiet, not loud. It was consistent, not reactive. The months passed, and the household settled into a new rhythm. While the stepbrothers were still present, their cruelty had less impact. Allah's careful handling of responsibilities, her calm responses, and her ability to maintain dignity in the face of hostility had shifted the balance. The house, once dominated by tension and fear, had become a space where integrity mattered more than intimidation. Alla found joy in small accomplishments. She managed accounts successfully, oversaw property maintenance, and ensured the household ran smoothly. She maintained kindness and respect, not out of expectation of reward, but because it was part of who she had become. Her stepfather's trust, now carried in her actions, guided her through every challenge. She also recognized the importance of teaching through example. She did not seek to punish her stepbrothers or prove them wrong. Instead, she demonstrated that responsibility, patience, and careful action held more power than anger or entitlement. Her approach created a quiet shift in the household dynamic, teaching lessons without confrontation. One evening, she stood in the garden, looking at the sky. She thought about the journey she had taken from feeling invisible and powerless to becoming a steady presence capable of handling responsibility and conflict. She realized that true inheritance was not property or money, but the trust, guidance, and values that had been passed to her. The stepbrothers' cruelty had been a challenge, but it had also revealed her strength. Their impatience and aggression had shown her where she could remain calm, how she could protect herself, and how she could navigate the world with dignity. The experience had taught her resilience, observation, and the quiet power of steadfastness. While also reflected on her mother's role. Her mother had been present but often silent, guiding with quiet encouragement rather than intervention. This had allowed Ayla to grow independently, to develop judgment and strength without interference. She appreciated the subtle support, understanding that real growth often comes through challenges rather than protection. As the final weeks unfolded, Ayla solidified her place in the household. She managed responsibilities, addressed disputes calmly, and continued to maintain her routines and personal life. The stepbrothers, while still resentful, had learned that their attempts at cruelty were ineffective. The household had reached a new balance, one in which integrity, patience, and careful action mattered more than aggression or entitlement. Ayla understood that the inheritance had not chosen her by accident. It had chosen her because she had proven herself through patience, care, and responsibility. Her stepfather's trust had been well placed, and she had honored it through her actions. The house, once a place of tension and fear, had become a testament to character and quiet strength. In the end, Allah did not celebrate the inheritance in material terms. She celebrated the lessons learned, the resilience gained, and the integrity maintained. She understood that wealth alone does not define a person. Responsibility, care, and steadfastness do. The stepbrothers' cruelty had been a challenge, but it had also highlighted her strength. Revealing the kind of person she had become, Allah moved forward with clarity and purpose. She managed the household and the inheritance responsibly, while also living a life outside the house filled with learning, reflection, and simple joys. The experience had taught her that true strength comes from consistency, patience, and moral clarity, and that the trust of someone who believes in you is the greatest inheritance of all. And so, the story of the house, the inheritance, and the stepbrothers came to a close knot in conflict, but in understanding and quiet triumph. Ayla had proven that patience, responsibility, and integrity could withstand cruelty, and that true strength is measured not by aggression, but by steadfastness, care, and the ability to rise above hostility while maintaining one's humanity. Even after months of careful navigation, Ayla knew that life in the household was not fully settled. The stepbrothers' anger had softened but never disappeared completely. There were moments when their words were sharp, or when their presence in the house felt like a silent challenge. Allah understood that maintaining peace was an ongoing effort, not a one-time achievement. She focused on her daily routines with renewed purpose. Each morning, she rose early, preparing her own breakfast and taking time to review household responsibilities. She checked accounts, organized schedules, and ensured that every small task was completed efficiently. Her attention to detail became a quiet statement. She was capable, responsible, and steady. Her stepbrothers observed her closely, sometimes with resentment, sometimes with curiosity. Their attempts to unsettle her had diminished, but Ayla knew that vigilance was still required. Every move she made was deliberate, every decision considered, and every interaction measured. She did not act out of fear or spite. She acted out of a sense of responsibility that had become second nature. One afternoon, Ayla decided to revisit the old study her stepfather had used. It was a room filled with memories, papers, and objects that spoke of years of work and careful planning. She began organizing the space, not to claim it, but to honor the life and effort that had been invested there. as she moved items, sorted documents, and cleaned surfaces. She felt a connection to her stepfather that was both comforting and inspiring. In the process, she discovered a stack of letters and journals that her stepfather had kept privately. These documents contained reflections, advice, and lessons he had learned over a lifetime. They were not legal papers or directives, but personal thoughts filled with insights about responsibility, human behavior, and the quiet strength required to navigate challenges. Allah read them carefully, absorbing each word, and storing the knowledge in her mind and heart. The stepbrothers noticed her time in the study. They approached at first with suspicion, questioning why she was spending so much time there. Allah responded calmly, explaining that she was organizing and preserving the space. She did not argue or justify beyond the facts. Their attempts to challenge her presence eventually faded as they realized she was simply fulfilling responsibilities, not seeking confrontation. Allah also took time to strengthen relationships outside the house. She visited neighbors, participated in community events, and maintained friendships that offered support and perspective. These connections reminded her that life extended beyond the confines of the household, and that resilience was built not only through confrontation, but through connection and balance. One day, a distant family member visited unexpectedly. They were curious about the inheritance and the household dynamics. Allah welcomed them politely, listened to their questions, and provided clear answers. The conversation was respectful, informative, and grounded in truth. By the end of the visit, the family member expressed admiration for her composure and fairness. Ayla felt a quiet satisfaction, understanding that respect was earned through action, not words. In the evenings, Ayla often walked through the garden, reflecting on the months that had passed. She thought about the journey from feeling powerless and invisible to becoming a steady, responsible presence in the household. She considered the challenges, the hostility, and the lessons learned. Each step in the garden became a metaphor for her path, slow, deliberate, and full of growth. The stepbrothers' attitudes continued to fluctuate. Sometimes they were resentful, other times indifferent. Allah noticed that their attempts to provoke her had become less frequent. They had begun to realize that their actions no longer controlled the household or dictated her behavior. This shift, though small, was significant. It demonstrated that consistency, patience, and integrity had more influence than aggression or entitlement. Ayla also began to implement small improvements around the house. She repaired worn items, organized spaces, and created systems that made daily life smoother. These actions were not meant to impress anyone, but to maintain order and efficiency. She found satisfaction in these small achievements, knowing that they contributed to a stable and harmonious environment. One evening, she overheard her stepbrothers discussing financial matters quietly in the living room. Their conversation revealed frustration and a recognition of her competence. They spoke with caution, weighing her opinions and considering her decisions. Allah listened from a distance, understanding that respect was being earned silently, without confrontation or force. Over time, she also noticed subtle shifts in her mother's demeanor. Her mother, once worried and hesitant, began to express confidence in Ayla's abilities. She offered support when necessary, allowed independence, and trusted Allah to handle challenges without interference. This quiet acknowledgement was powerful, reinforcing Ayla's sense of responsibility and capability. Ayla reflected on the inheritance not as a prize, but as a responsibility and a reflection of trust. Her stepfather had chosen her not because of wealth, but because of her character. Every act of care, patience, and responsibility had been recognized, even if silently. The lessons she had learned extended beyond the household, shaping her understanding of human behavior, resilience, and leadership. She also recognized the importance of boundaries. She maintained her personal space, routines, and interests, ensuring that her life was not consumed entirely by household conflict. She balanced responsibility with self-care, understanding that sustainability required both attention and distance. This balance became a source of strength and clarity. The months continued with a rhythm of observation, careful action, and quiet reflection. Allah documented important events, maintained legal and personal records, and approached challenges with foresight. Her stepbrother's hostility, while still present occasionally, had lost its power. She had established a new dynamic, one where patience, integrity, and responsibility shaped the household more than anger or entitlement. Ayla also focused on community involvement. She volunteered for small causes, helped neighbors with practical tasks, and engaged in activities that nurtured compassion and understanding. These actions reinforced the values her stepfather had imparted and demonstrated that true responsibility extends beyond personal gain. One day, she received news that a distant relative had formally acknowledged her management of the household and inheritance. They praised her fairness, diligence, and composure. Ayla felt a sense of validation, not because she sought recognition, but because her efforts had created trust and respect in meaningful ways. Reflecting on the entire journey, Ayla realized that the inheritance had been more than property or money. It was a measure of character, an opportunity to demonstrate integrity, and a testament to resilience. The stepbrothers' cruelty, while painful, had highlighted her strengths, teaching lessons that no comfort or praise could replicate. In quiet moments, Ayla often stood in the garden or the study, absorbing the lessons and reflecting on the path she had traveled. She understood that challenges would continue, but she now possessed the tools: patience, observation, integrity, and resilience to face them. The house, once a place of tension and hostility, had become a space of responsibility, learning, and quiet triumph. By the end of this chapter, Ayla had achieved more than just managing the inheritance. She had proven that consistency, patience, and moral clarity could withstand hostility. She had shown that trust is earned through action, not demanded. And she had learned that true strength is measured not by dominance, but by integrity, resilience, and the ability to rise above cruelty while maintaining humanity. The household settled into a rhythm where responsibility, care, and careful management mattered more than anger or entitlement. Ayla's life, shaped by these experiences, reflected not just the inheritance she received, but the person she had become, person capable of facing challenges with calmness, clarity, and unwavering strength.